Hello, I'm Velina Tchakarova and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Now, the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. is about to begin, and one of the main issues the alliance's leaders are facing is the need to secure long-term support for Ukraine. To discuss some of the possible measures which could be taken, we're joined by our guest, Velina Tchakarova from the FACE Geopolitical Consultancy. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So what would you expect to be the measures taken in this regard? We know that NATO has exhibited a remarkable consistency throughout the years, but also that it is facing certain political challenges along the way.
Well, obviously, as we know, NATO is not a political organization, it's a defense alliance. And here, of course, the expectation is to actually have a lot of debates on how to coordinate better, how to deepen especially the interoperability when it comes to the eastern flank. This is going to be, unfortunately, and that's my personal view, the new Iron Curtain 2.0, as we are already in the third year of the war of Russia against Ukraine. And obviously, a big topic will be spending, with 23 NATO members being expected to spend more and reach finally the 2% goal of GDP.
So two very important issues there, if I may, because you've raised two very important questions. Now, the first one, this hypothetical Iron Curtain, which is actually forming as we speak, one could say. The big question is, where would it actually be situated? Would it encompass Ukraine on the right side of the Iron Curtain, or would Ukraine remain on the wrong side of it? What are your expectations here? Because the talk about allowing Ukraine into NATO, this has been ongoing, and many people really want this to happen. But there is also some skepticism there among certain Western leaders in particular.
Indeed. And of course, if you listen to the voices coming from Central Eastern European countries, but increasingly also from the Scandinavian members, now we will have two new members participating in the, in the NATO summit, and these are Sweden and Finland. You are actually going to hear the overlapping position that Ukraine belongs to NATO, that actually, Ukraine's future is in NATO, and we should not wait until the end of the war to start actually preparing Ukraine's membership. That's the one general position, right? But the second one being, the one that Ukraine's future in NATO should, be determined once the war is over. That comes mostly from the capitals in France, in Germany. That's the more conservative position that right now there are more urgent issues to be covered, specifically linked to the ongoing war, and also to the issues that the defense alliance is facing, because let's not forget it's not just about Russia, it's increasingly about China, and also about the international partnerships NATO that NATO has to shape in the Indo-Pacific, given the fact that the United States is increasingly being focused on the Indo-Pacific terrain and the European pillar of NATO. These are the European NATO members, should increasingly actually build up this so-called eastern flank of NATO. Now, to maybe just shortly answer to your question, I would recommend the first position than the second, because it's going to be decisive how the current war efforts are supporting Ukraine in this ongoing war that Russia is waging. By the way, Russia is waging also a war against the whole of Europe. It's a non-kinetic war that NATO has the playbook from the Soviet times, from the Cold War, to actually engage against. And in that sense, if we allow Russia to achieve both the war efforts in Ukraine and the non-kinetic war efforts against European security architecture and European economic model, then I would argue that this Iron Curtain 2.0 will entail a large part of Ukraine being on the wrong side.
Now, you've mentioned there are two approaches. There seems to be a third position too, and this has been articulated in particular in a recent plan published by the political allies of Donald Trump. It was not endorsed by Trump himself, but these are essentially his security advisors. So the so-called Kellogg plan. Now, this, among other things, suggests that Ukraine perhaps should not, in the foreseeable future, be allowed into NATO at all. And this, unfortunately, appears to be the position of a couple of leaders, especially on the far right side of the spectrum. So this also brings us, in a way, back to the question of political challenges, which NATO, being a non-political organization, as you pointed out, is facing, nevertheless. Do you think that a Trump presidency, if it happens, would essentially turn everything upside down? And can NATO secure its core policies against such political influences?
Well, you are asking a geopolitical expert who actually relies more on reality and what's happening in reality than political statements to give you the, let's say, big picture. And let me remind you that during the first mandate of Trump, the military presence of the United States and U.S. troops, specifically in Central Eastern European NATO members, has increased, not decreased, despite the very troubled relationship Trump actually had with both NATO and the European Union. So we will have probably both once again. On the one hand, Trump will be, again, very much transactional when it comes to his relationship with organizations like big organizations such as the European Union and NATO. But on the other side, Trump is going to make sure to have a very, very strong card when he starts negotiating or interacting with any of his rivals and competitors. And here I would argue that he, first and foremost, will make sure to boost the military presence. And that means, obviously, this Iron Curtain 2.0, the eastern flank of NATO, very strong partners, which I would argue Trump would consider in the Scandinavian region, but also in Central and Eastern Europe, specifically Poland, Romania. And he will boost actually the defense in Ukraine as well before actually pressuring the political leadership of Ukraine to agree on any kind of negotiation. So all of these speculations right now coming from any kind of plans or any kind of, rumors are, in my view, very short-sighted, because in reality, he would not allow to have a very weak card in any negotiations or come out very weak in any kind of negotiations with someone like Putin or Xi Jinping.
So that's a very important point. Now, the other point that the followers of Donald Trump and Donald Trump himself are actually making is that NATO has a spending problem. Do you think that it can be solved, and that Mark Rutte, who often has been referred to as the Trump whisperer, would actually be the best man for the job? Because as we see it, the eastern flank, well, the spending statistics are actually fine, mostly above 2%. But the 2% GDP threshold is not met by many countries in the West. And this is what the Americans, or at least the possible potential Trump administration, is saying, wait, we're paying for your security. Shouldn't you chip in more before we actually continue our cooperation? So do you think that this problem is likely to be very much on the agenda in the near future?
I'm absolutely convinced that this is going to be on the agenda, the one way or the other, whether it's going to be Trump 2.0 or Biden 2.0. It doesn't matter, because, in that matter, we should be honest and, admit that Trump was right about, his points that he made right from the beginning of his first, mandate, when he said that, European NATO members were not really contributing financially to the budget. Even with the beginning of the Russian war against Ukraine, especially in the first phase, we saw very clearly the same problem, namely that if it had not been for the United States military aid to Ukraine, Ukraine would have probably capitulated because, as we all know, European leadership, European member states, it takes time to take a decision, to start, rolling the military aid and so on and so forth. And here it's not just about signaling, it's not about gestures or symbolic, it's really about actually filling the gaps of the European defense budget. And even more so, this is going to be a matter of the European security and defense policy. So it's not only going to be about the NATO in general, but it's going to be about, let's say, the European pillar of NATO, and by extension, the future of the European security and defense, because obviously the defense topic is going to be also a big topic of the agenda of the new European Commission. So,
do you think Europe has what it takes to achieve that? Many people say, okay, the industrial base, if expanded, if the weapons production is brought back to Cold War era levels, for example, then obviously we can. Economically, we're stronger than Russia. But they also say the problem is that you need a broad consensus. The United States, that's a single country. The European Union, now you need agreement between countries before you proceed. Do you think that this is the main issue here, that there is no streamlined decision-making process in this regard?
I think that this is one of the major problems, but actually the biggest problem I've seen right from the beginning of the Russian war was actually the inability of political leadership to communicate openly and honestly with, the own population, namely to say that we are in war conditions. And as I said right from the beginning, non-kinetic war is still a war. Waging a war with other means is a war. And here, the most honest thing will have to be to actually start rolling up a war economy, especially in Central Eastern European countries, also in European Union candidates, which are closer to Ukraine. War economy would have brought about already the first visible effects. Of course, I mean ammunition, mostly military aid that Ukraine desperately needs because it is the conventional, part of the war that has to be decided first and foremost. The non-kinetic part will last much longer, and it will have a devastating inflationary effect on all European economies, as we see, buzzword rise of populism. So here, it's not just about streamline and having all leaders on the same page. It's really about genuine strategic thinking, in which some very, let's say, politically incorrect steps need to be taken in the short term. And I think that with the statements of the European Commissioner Breton, who probably will be again a commissioner, who said that we need to really launch a war economy, this will be the starter, and that will bring us to the next step, and that is the step of how to actually allocate the 370 billion, if you take this defense budget of all 27 European Union member states, and we have then, of course, by extension, also the rest of NATO member states. So
tough decisions need to be taken, and that perhaps is the fitting conclusion for this conversation. A non-kinetic war is still a war, so we need to think about how to win it. Velina Tchakarova was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for the invitation.
And I'm Jan You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.